Hello, friends, and welcome to our Friday evening monk chat, or Friday evening live stream here at Empty Cloud Monastery. I hope that you're all doing well and that you're all having a nice night, or if you end up watching this video later on as it's recorded, I hope that you're having a good day, whatever time it is for you. And so today we will be answering questions as our usual program goes. So please feel free to leave any questions that you have related to Buddha, Dhamma, or Sangha, related to Buddhism and meditation, to monks or the suttas and so on. You can leave those in the comments, the live comments of this video. And we also have a live audience with us who are joining. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask. Though we do prioritize the online questions just because we have questions every day here at the monastery, except Tuesday. So if you're in the area, you can also come for a live monk chat every day at 5 p.m., except for Tuesday. Okay, so this time I'm going to render homage to the Buddha, to our original teacher, the reason that we're here gathered today and that we have access to discuss these teachings. So I'll render homage to the Buddha and then we can go ahead and get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang saranang gacchami. Okay, so hello to everyone who's joining. I see Camino Antiguo and Rick and Harry, Visus, Michael, Hare, maybe Lydia, Cows, our friends, Etienne, Meredith, Bhumika, Sean. So lots of people joining in. Julie. So I hope you're all doing well. And we have our first question from Camino says, is it too early to post questions? That was at 4:51 p.m. And that's okay. You can actually leave them early if you'd like. That way we get to them later. And they ask, is there any truth to the modern idea that the Abhidhamma and commentaries are inferior or even contradictory to what the sutras teach? I hear that often. Okay. So yeah, this is a great question. Asking, for those who don't know, in Buddhism we have the Tipitaka, that's 3 baskets. And that refers to the 3 different collections of the Buddhist scriptures, you could say. So the first is actually the Vinaya Pitaka, that's the rules for monks, the monk's conduct. So most people don't really read that very much, unless you're a monk. And then the second is the Sutta Pitaka, that is the collection of the Buddha's discourses, his teachings. So, teaching about meditation and precepts and wisdom and so on. And then you have the Abhidhamma Pitaka, and that is the collection that is related to almost a kind of technical, philosophical breakdown of Buddhist concepts. So it kind of takes the teachings from the suttas and it makes like a periodic table of elements, and then puts all the interactions and all the ways that they relate to each other and asks a bunch of different questions. It's very, very, very dry to read. You can't just really read it. So you'll just be repeating. And actually, at funerals in Theravada Buddhism, sometimes we chant the table of contents to that. So it's almost like if you had a chemistry textbook and they chanted the table of contents to the chemistry textbook at a funeral. So it's actually very dry. But you might know it if you're from a Buddhist country. It goes kusala dhamma vyakata dhamma. So then it goes through a whole list of all the different dhammas, right? And in Burma, especially Myanmar, that's very, very popular, right? So monks will specialize in the Abhidhamma. Not just the Abhidhamma Pitaka, but also the commentaries on the Abhidhamma and the sub-commentaries on the Abhidhamma and the Abhidhamma manuals that are derived from the commentaries and sub-commentaries. And their teachers' manuals that are derived from the manuals, which are derived from the sub-commentaries and the commentaries. So, and the Abhidhamma. So they have a lot of focus on the Abhidhamma, especially in Myanmar, Burmese Buddhism. But also in Sri Lanka and also in Thailand, and around the Buddhist world. So the Abhidhamma is very revered, but it's actually based on the suttas. It's a kind of systematization of them. And then you also mentioned the commentaries. So this, I assume you're referring to mostly the Pali commentaries called the Atthakatha. And these are traditional commentaries, which are, as you would expect, they comment on the meaning and on the contents of the suttas, as well as the Abhidhamma, as well as the Vinaya, actually. But they comment on them. So it's kind of like if you've ever, if you know a Christian background, you can actually get a Bible. If you're from maybe like America, there's Protestant Christianity, right? But most Christians, they don't just read the Bible and interpret it, however Uncle Jeff said to. They actually follow, a tradition and so on. So they have very strict, there's a way to read it and there's a way not to read it. And so in Buddhism, you have commentaries, which are, from a very traditional perspective, they're considered almost infallible, almost to like a point of you just don't disagree with them. So that's like a very traditional way of like, if it says it in the book, then that's how it is. And if you disagree, well, shut up, right? So that's like a very traditional way of teaching. Now, most people, or I should say a lot of people, they don't necessarily think that way, right? But if you're being very, very, like strict, then you just won't, you often won't disagree. So nowadays it's quite popular or common to hear people say that you shouldn't read the Abhidhamma and you shouldn't even read the commentaries. And as you say, that they're inferior and even contradictory, right? And I think that is just a natural reaction, right? It's kind of like if your whole life you are told, this is how it is, and you have to interpret it this way. And then you start looking and you think, I don't know if that is how it is. I don't know if I should interpret it that way. Then you start being skeptical. You start getting skeptical of the traditional commentaries, right? You start thinking maybe these are not always these are not always right. So then it's natural to have a kind of reaction of like, don't even read those. So that's what happened in Protestant Christianity, right? Very similar thing. Not exactly the same, but in Protestant Christianity, for those who don't know, we basically have, like in modern American Christianity, many Americans will, say, you are the arbiter of what's the right way to interpret the Bible, right? So it's very personal. It's like you read it and then you decide, right? So the church over here says this, and that pastor says this, and that one says this, and everyone else is wrong except for them, right? So everyone is right and everyone else is also wrong. So you can kind of get two extremes. Like one extreme is, you interpret it however you want, like the aliens are coming next Thursday, and then you can also interpret it like the only way to read it is the traditional 1,000-year-old commentaries. And so the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's somewhere in the middle. The truth is that the commentaries can be very useful and they can be very helpful. And it's important not to be arrogant. Like, oh, I can interpret this ancient text from 2,500 years ago and, don't know the language, not from the culture, don't have all the history. It wasn't, so we don't want to be arrogant. Like actually these are complex texts and they're complex ideas. But we also don't want to be overly fanatic and stubborn and say, well, maybe ancient people were also wrong, right? They're also just people. The commentaries were not composed by the Buddha. They were composed by monks over many hundreds of years and eventually codified at a certain point by a very famous monk named Venerable Buddhaghosa, as well as other monks like Venerable Dhammapala and some others. So you have a few famous monks who kind of codified, translated and codified and systematized the commentaries. And then sometimes they get turned into like the hero or the villain. Like, oh, he's a horrible person, he ruined Buddhism, or oh, he's amazing, he's the best. So it's somewhere in the middle, it's just a monk who's trying to do, the right thing. Like it's just a monk who's trying to codify how they think, how they understand the tradition, So if you're, it's not either a villain or a hero. It's just, it's good that they're there because actually most people who learn Pali, it's only possible really because of especially because of the commentaries, because part of their function serves as like a dictionary as well, not just a commenting on the meaning. So yeah, it's important just to, of course, I would say the commentaries in Abhidhamma are inferior in the sense that, they're secondary. Like they are lower level because you have the root text and then you have the commenting on that text. So which is more important? It's the root text, right? It's not the comment. The other thing to keep in mind is that the commentaries they're not unbiased. So that's important. It's not like they just pick up the sutta and then they think, what does this mean in its own context? That's not how they're interpreting it. The way that they're interpreting the suttas is through hundreds of years of development of matching the Abhidhamma ideas which developed in ancient India with the ideas in the suttas. So it's a very specific, what we call a hermeneutic. That means like a way of interpreting texts. So it's not like an unbiased, it's not like a text historian nowadays would do it. It's done in a specific way. So they have a specific doctrinal points that they're trying to make. So like, for example, in Theravada, there are certain teachings in the Abhidhamma that they're actually not found in the suttas. They developed after that, maybe over many years of philosophizing and so on. They developed certain new ideas, but then they'll read those back into the suttas and say that's what it means. So that's not, that's one way of interpreting it, but that's why I say, it's important to just keep in mind that they have an agenda, which is not evil. It's normal. They have an agenda of how they understand things. And so you're not going to get like a wide assortment of different opinions. You're going to get one school's opinion and a couple different teachers, maybe ideas within that range in the commentaries. And in the Abhidhamma, I would recommend that if you want to study it, you should read all the suttas first. You should practice meditation, and you should learn the Abhidhamma with this mindset that I'm saying right now, like the mindset that this is a potentially helpful later systematization, which is not infallible, and it is not the arbiter of everything else. You see what I mean? So like you shouldn't interpret the suttas through the Abhidhamma. You should interpret the Abhidhamma through the suttas. You shouldn't interpret the commentaries you shouldn't interpret the suttas through the commentaries only. You should interpret the commentaries by relating to them to the suttas and finding a balance. So that's the best way to approach it. And last thing on that is that there's a translator, Bhante Sujato, and I remember he said that a Burmese monk advised him, he translated all the suttas, all the early suttas into English, and a Burmese monk advised him, if you're translating a sutta, then if you don't understand it, you should take, I think maybe like a day or take, a few days, take some time, meditate on it and think about it and try to contemplate, what does this mean? And if you can't get the meaning out of it, then look at the commentary and see if that helps you understand it. And contemplate that. And then if that really doesn't help, then look at the sub-commentary and see if that helps. So that's a good way of doing it. Try to see if you can understand it in the context of the other suttas. And if you can't really make sense of it, then look at the commentary. What does the commentary say? And if you really can't get that, then you can look at the sub-commentary. No, that is, however, resting on the fact that you speak fluent commentarial Pali, which most people don't. Most of them are not translated, but some of them are. And so that's one way that you can balance it. Okay, and the second question is from Thesis. It says, the standard right view formula starts with, there is what is given, there is what is offered, and there is what is sacrificed. Could you expand on the meaning of this? Giving and offering seem the same to me. Yeah, so the Pali is attidinang attitang attihutang, I believe. So attidinang means there exists what is given. Attiyutang, there exists what is sacrificed, and attihutang, there exists what is offered. And you might think, well, that sounds obvious. I know that. I see that things are given and offered. But it's referring actually to not the fact that there are gifts in the world, but it's referring to the fact that what is offered, when people make offerings and gifts, that it actually has efficacy in terms of future lives, in terms of making merit. That's what it means. So some people in the time of the Buddha, they said that when you made offerings to, like, let's say your parents pass away and then you make some offerings, they said, that is a doctrine of morons. You're just setting out, you're just giving stuff away or leaving it out for it doesn't go anywhere. You're just wasting stuff. You're just throwing it away, basically. So they said that was idiotic to do that there's no such thing as real offerings, or, you should just use it yourself. Or, you go out of your way to give things and you do it in order to make good karma or whatever. And they would say, yeah, you're not actually creating any good karma. And they would say, both the wise and the foolish, they go to the exact same place when they die. That's the cemetery. So they didn't believe in an afterlife, and they thought that was silly. And they thought that, it's obvious. They thought that it was obvious that when you die, your body goes to the graveyard and that's it. It's over. And so they didn't think that there was such a thing as offerings, like actual efficacious offerings and sacrifices. So the Buddha is saying, he doesn't agree with that opinion. He doesn't think that that's accurate. It's not just he doesn't think it, but he realizes through insight as he teaches his disciples how to do that. So that's the other part of right view. The end of it says something like Atiloke Samana Brahmana. So there are religious people in the world, And those people, they realize with their own insight the reality of the afterlife and karma, and then they declare it to other people. So yeah, that's the idea here, is that it's talking about gifts and offerings and sacrifices, which in a Buddhist context refers to non-violent sacrifices. The Buddha didn't, he didn't recommend animal sacrifice, but non-violent sacrifice, like making offerings to charities and monks and religious people and to your parents and so on, those types of things. And there's not much of a difference in the meaning of the words. So given refers to just gifts in general. Offered and sacrificed, these used to be different words. So yitta is related to the word for sacrifice. So like, if you maybe sacrifice an animal, that would be a sacrifice. But in the Buddhist context, the Buddha kind of redefined sacrifice to just mean when you make an offering, any kind of offering, giving something away as an offering. And then offered hutang is also used for like an oblation. So sometimes in the Brahminical tradition, you would put things in a fire, and it was believed that the fire would consume it and then bring it up to the heaven, to the gods. So that's not a Buddhist view, but the word is being kind of repurposed to just mean offerings, like when you offer something. So they all kind of mean the exact same thing. It just means religious offerings, like offerings that are made in a religious context, not like, oh, I gave someone a Christmas present. Everyone agrees that those exist. Everyone agrees that that happens. But it's talking about religious offerings, religious gifts, that those are efficacious. Okay, and Etienne, I'm sorry, not sure if I'm pronouncing your name properly. It's French, I believe. Says that you have been practicing meditation deeply for 7 years, and you have a master's in religion with a focus on the Satipatthana Suttas. And you stayed at a monastery for 2 and then for 3 years. And you said you've been in the world and find that you struggle. So you've had difficulty meditating and have lost focus. You want to find a nice balance and are not sure how to approach the next stage of practice. Great. Well, yeah, I think that you're signed up for a residency at the monastery, so I think that will be helpful. I think it's nice that you've been meditating, for 7 years, and that you studied the Satipatthana Suttas and so on. Also stayed in monasteries for several years. That's really great. In terms of what you can do, it's, I would recommend if you are coming to the monastery, that might be a better time, because it's kind of very broad, very vague. If someone says that they want to find a balance in their practice and so on, but I don't know, what you're doing and so on. So I could talk about like the whole, the entirety of Buddhism. So it kind of depends on what you are specifically doing and not doing. And so I'd have to kind of evaluate with you in person, ideally. So the one thing I would say is that difficulty in meditation and losing focus is normal. That's why we meditate, right? And you want to look at the gradual training. So if you have studied the Satipatthana Sutta, well, the Satipatthana, right, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 ways of mindful attention, they are the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. So that means you have a whole 6 of factors before you get there, right? So if you took maybe it takes you 2 years to get a master's on the 7th one. So that's the 6 times 2 is 12 years. You get a master's on all the other 6 steps before you get to the 7th. So you can also study those other factors, which I'm sure that you have, but look at those. That's what the Buddha says. He doesn't say, okay, meditate, and then then attain awakening. No, he says, okay, first you start here, and then here, and then here, and then here. You clarify your view, your way of looking at the world. And then you start clarifying your thoughts and your thinking patterns and your intentions. And then you start clarifying your speech and refining how you speak. And then you start clarifying your bodily actions. And then you start clarifying your livelihood. And then you start practicing right effort and gardening your inner life, gardening your mind, cultivating wholesome, healthy qualities, beautiful qualities in the heart, learning how those arise, learning the cause and effect of the mind, experimenting in a wholesome, healthy way. And you start to learn how to do that, how to have more control, how to have more peace. And then you practice mindfulness meditation. So that is a lot of steps before you get there. And so you don't expect to, have meditation be easy every time. And especially don't expect meditation to be easy without a strong foundation in generosity, in virtue, restraint, right speech, and right effort, and so on. So all these things But when you're here in person, or if you come, or if you have a more specific question, then I could address that better. Yeah. And we also have a comment from Yu Xuan, who is recently here. I hope you're doing well.
Hi.
It says octopus red waving. I think that's supposed to be an emoji, but it doesn't exist. So on YouTube. Okay. And Rick has a question. Says, can you share some reflections on skillful versus unskillful uses of food? How do we let go of this crutch of food before we have the spiritual development to no longer need it? Well, good question, Rick. Of course, food, the Buddha says, sabbe sata ahara titika, right? So that means all beings depend on nutriment. All beings have to eat, right? And that includes even the beings without a body. So every being has some kind of nutriment that they depend on. We're dependent, right? We're not independent. So food, solid food, is probably a daily reality for most people, right? So every single day, you probably have some kind of food that you're eating, unless you're fasting or maybe very hungry, not have access. But most people are eating maybe even more than once a day, right? So it's important that food is part of our practice. I remember I once did a retreat at a monastery, and they at the end of the retreat, towards the end of the retreat, they had a big block where you could do your own practice, like your own meditation. So you could divide it, how you wanted to. And they said you can do any meditation that you want. So you can do sitting meditation, walking meditation. They also have like working practice. And they said the only one you can't do is eating meditation, right? Because at lunchtime we would do eating meditation. So that was not allowed. But that's because actually eating should be part of your practice. Eating should also be meditation. It really is, like literally a meditation, 100%. The Buddha even has a name. He calls it ahare patikula sanya, perceiving the repulsiveness of food. And so that's a whole meditation. And then he also has reflection that the monks do, and the lay people also, when they're at the monastery, do every single day. Before we eat, patisankha, yoniso, pindapatam, patisevami, etc. So that whole thing. And I don't know if you've seen that, Rick, but if you've done chanting or been to a monastery, you might have. But that is the Buddha's main teaching on solid edible food. So the Buddha says that we should reflect whenever we eat, before, after, and any time basically on food, we should be reflecting. But especially before you eat, especially right before you take a bite. Because if you do this reflection, it's very easy, like, the reflection on food, which I'll explain in a moment. And then you pause, and then you start eating, and all of a sudden it's gone. You're just completely absorbed in eating. In the reflection, it's almost like it didn't even happen. So it's important to really integrate this into your eating practice. It's the main teaching on how to eat food. So that is patisankha yoniso pindapatam patisevami. Wisely reflecting with wisdom, reflecting carefully and thoroughly. You eat alms food. So if you're a lay person, you eat normal food. If you're a monk, you eat alms food. Pindapatam patisevami. Neva davaya, namadaya, namandanaya, navibhosanaya. Here we translate that as not for fun, not for pleasure, not for indulgence, and not for adornment. So that means when you eat food, you don't do it to have fun. Like, oh, look at the nice design and the tasty this and the that and the salty and sweet and the mixture here and no, you do it not for fun, not for pleasure, not for indulgence, and not for decoration. What does that mean? Well, one could be maybe you start putting carrots like vampire fangs and you put some onion rings, but also it means like you select, oh, I'm going to eat that because I want to have big muscles, and I'm going to eat that because I need to lose weight and have better cheekbones, and I'm going to eat that for this. And so we start eating food for our bodily appearance in order to affect other people, like not a practical health reason. So the Buddha says you shouldn't eat for those reasons, right? You shouldn't eat for fun and for pleasure and for indulgence. Why? Well, that would take a long time. But basically it is because when we indulge in food, when we indulge in these pleasures, we are training our mind to be like an animal, to be untamed. So then we are always liking and disliking. We want to have a cool mind, a mind which is serene, which is unaffected. It doesn't get grumpy when it doesn't have the food it doesn't like. Doesn't get agitated and desirous and anxious when it's about to have nice food. right? We don't want to be dogs. Why do dogs get born with such powerful ears and noses and tongues? Because all of their desire. So our senses are like a manifestation of our desire. So if you're born as a human, that means in your past life, you must have had a good amount of restraint and virtue, but not too much, right? And so you don't want to be cultivating like a pig, right? Literally. So we want to be civilized. we want to have a balance with food, right? Otherwise, we're just cultivating the heart of an animal, literally the heart of an animal. So in Buddhism, that's part of the teachings on rebirth is that you get reborn exactly where you want to go. You want to have fun and, pig out. That is possible. It's very much possible. You could get reborn as a pig. You could get reborn as an animal. So we don't like, that's not fun. It might sound cute, but it's not. So we want to be civilized. And so you can use reflections like that. You can say, I want to have a tame, controlled, calm mind, and a mind that is not affected and swayed. And the Buddha even says, he says to the monks, he says, monks, imagine that two parents were crossing a desert with their only child, their beloved child, so dear and sweet, their little newborn infant. And as they're crossing the desert, they start running out of rations of food. And they see, wow, we don't have enough food to make it across the desert. We're going to die. And he says that, so they decide the only way for them to make it across, they decide that they're going to kill their child, cook him and eat it, make it into jerky. So then they eat the child's flesh. And the Buddha says, what do you think, monks? Do you think when they ate that jerky, they would be eating it for fun and for pleasure? No, right? They would not be eating it for fun and for pleasure. But when we eat animals, when we eat the innocent creatures, and when we eat even plants where many insects have been killed to produce the food, and many workers have labored, the amount of work that's gone into the food, maybe even war over the territory and so on. I remember as a layperson, I didn't watch it, but I saw there was some kind of even gang violence over avocados in Mexico, So even crops can cause a lot of violence. And so when we eat food, we tend to just be ungrateful, not even thinking all the sacrifice, all the labor, all the death, all the work, all the difficulty it is for other people to have food. And it's very easy for us to just indulge in what we have. So the Buddha says we should reflect like that whenever we're eating. This is just to cross across the desert. They don't eat the child for fun. It's not to, maybe I'll have this part just so I can, have nice calves or something. No, right? They eat it just to get across the desert. So what is the desert? The desert is our spiritual practice. It's our samsaric journey. So we should eat just to nourish our body. And then the Buddha says, so just for the sake of continuing this body so that it can be healthy and keep going. To remove discomfort, to be comfortable so we don't have sharp pains, and to continue our spiritual practice. So we eat as part of our spiritual practice. And he says, so I will remove the past unpleasant feelings. So that means when you get hungry, it's unpleasant. So you eat to remove the pains of hunger so that you can just focus on, you don't have to be focused on the difficulty of being hungry. But he says, but without creating new uncomfortable feelings. That's referring to when you overeat. So you're like, oh, I'm so hungry, it so hurts, and you eat, and then, oh, I'm so full, I need to lay down. So, that is what the Buddha is talking about. There's like this, too hungry, too full, and then you just digest your food, and now you eat again, and then you eat again. So the Buddha is saying just enough, right? Just right. And then he says, so in this way, I will be, just to keep going, so that in this way, I will be blameless and abide in comfort. So you can feel blameless. Like you eat your food with gratitude, with mindfulness. You eat your food without indulgence. You have a calm mind, so you're blameless. You don't have to feel guilty, like, oh, that was, I really, indulged too much. You don't feel good after, like, I should really be more mindful about what I'm eating. So you can feel blameless and clean. And you can also be comfortable because you'll be just right. You won't have the pains of hunger, but your body will feel light, and you will also not be, too drowsy and sleepy and heavy. So that's the attitude. And so there's a lot to be said about that, but that's the main reflection that the Buddha gives. And so I would recommend every day before you eat, at any meal, you reflect on that thoroughly. And then you look at the food, you just, take even a few seconds is okay. Just a minute or just a few moments. And just while you're eating it, contemplate that you're going to just eat this just to sustain your body, and just be mindful of the process of eating. Be mindful of the process of chewing. If you look so tasty, and then you say, so what if someone else chewed this up for me and offered it to me? Would it be tasty? Would it be just as enticing? Or what if I chewed it up and then I spit it out, and then I put that on a plate and had it in a few hours? Would it be tasty and enticing? But it's the same thing. It's just been chewed up. It has a little bit of saliva on it. But actually, when we're eating, it all gets mashed in our mouth. So, also the sweet, the salty, the bitter, the sour, it all gets mashed in there and covered in saliva, and it goes and it becomes feces. So then also when you go to the bathroom, it's good to look and see, that's my cake, that's my rice, and that's my lunch today. Not so yummy anymore, right? So also our food is part of that cycle. So it's all the same thing. It's just a different phase, right? So like, for example, when you have a child, a little baby, 40 years later, they look totally different. But you say, it's the same person. But when it's your hamburger and then it's in the toilet, it's a totally different thing. But it's actually it's been less than 40 years, less change than from an infant to an adult, right? So, I love my child. And then when they're 40, I love my baby. But then when you poop, you don't, I love my hamburgers, right? So it's the same though. So we have to reflect like, this is just the cycle of food. It's the same thing. And so it's actually not attractive and it's not repulsive. It just is what it is. It's neutral. And so we want to have that mind of like, it's just food. It's just neutral. So yeah, but also eating healthily, not eating like then going and getting what now they have Soylent, right? They have these foods, which are probably kind of like chemical processed, sort of not high quality, whole foods that are kind of just to nourish your body. But actually we want to be eating healthy whole foods, sustaining good people, people who grow good food and who cultivate wholesome, farming practices and so on. So yeah, we don't want to, we eat for nourishment, not just to torture ourselves, eat good food, nourish your body, but you do it with that attitude. So those are a few reflections on just the practice of food. But again, that would really be a whole topic in and of itself. So maybe in the future we could talk about sutta. Okay, and then Robert says, do the suttas talk about dealing with anxiety? Would that just fall under the basket of restlessness and worry? I mean, the suttas, they do talk about dealing with anxiety, but the terminology is maybe less exacting just because I think anxiety is, it's a universal thing, but it's become more and more of a problem, I feel, in the modern world. Not that it wasn't there in the past or anything, but I think it's an especially prominent thing nowadays. So especially with addictions to technology, and we talked about actually this morning, FOMO, fear of missing out, right? So these types of things can cause anxiety, as well as just the stress of being a wage slave for a company, and being your whole life resting on a college exam or something. So all these things are your life kind of gets centered around these miniature moments. So it's there is such a, the suttas talk about anxiety, but it's a little bit different if you live in the fields of ancient India and the only thing you have to worry about is a few goats in your big field, and you look up in the sky, there's no newspaper, no books, no internet, you don't even know how to read. You might not have ever seen a letter in your life. And so the mind is just used to being alone. What do? You just have to be happy with what you have. Otherwise you can't make it, really. So I'm not saying that anxiety doesn't exist, but I just think that the cultural context is a little bit different. But they also did have cities in the time, and they did have people who were busy and so on. And there's one time when one of the Buddha's disciples, a major lay disciple, and he comes to the Buddha and he says, when I'm at the monastery, I feel so peaceful and so calm. But then when I go out to the city and there's all the elephants running around, so the semi-trucks and cars, and there's all the people talking and bustling and buzzing, and there's the business and so on. And he says that he feels like he loses his mindfulness. His mind becomes very scattered, and he's really concerned that what if he dies at that time, like when his mind is very restless? What if he dies in that state? And the Buddha tells him, do not fear, Mahanama, do not fear. Do not be afraid. And he says, for a long time, you've established your heart in the triple gem and in virtue, in goodness. And so when you pass away, he goes into talking about how you don't need to be concerned about it. You don't need to worry. So that's actually an example of he had anxiety. He was worried, like, I'm really afraid of what's going to happen. I'm anxious about that if I die. And the Buddha tells him, don't worry. Focus on your virtue. Focus on all the goodness that you have. Focus that you don't have to be afraid of the future if you cultivate a beautiful present. So we say in Buddhism, if you want to know what you did in the past, look at what you're experiencing now. If you want to know what the future will be like, look at what you're doing now. So we don't need to be anxious about the future. We just need to do good in the present, right? So you're anxious, what's going to happen? Well, if you're virtuous, then it's all going to be okay. There was also one monk who once visited this monastery existed, visited Bhakti-Vinaya, and I remember them telling me about this. One of the people in New York City said they're anxious. They don't know what to do. This is a forest monk. And he said, you should practice the 5 precepts, right? Because when you are doing immoral or morally questionable things, then you feel restless with yourself and you feel anxious about people finding out. So the Buddha actually talks about anxiety in that terms. He says that if you cultivate virtue, if you have inner principles, inner goodness, inner standards, then when you go into an assembly, you won't be nervous or afraid. You'll actually be very confident because you'll know you have nothing to hide. And so he actually talks about anxiety in that sense. He also talks about people who get kind of pale and very ill, not well because they do something bad and they have a lot of remorse and anxiety about it. So then they start feeling like it's visibly, they get unwell. So virtue, cultivating inner goodness, inner principles, not just the 5 precepts, but on a more refined level, in terms of your speech, in terms of your mindfulness, in terms of your kindness and the gentleness in your mind, that can really help with anxiety. So the Buddha talks about it in that context. And he talks about, you say general restlessness and worry. It would also fall under restlessness and worry, yes. Anxiety is a compulsion to think. It's a compulsion to worry. So it's when the mind is telling you, you should think about this. What about that? Have you thought about this? And you think, oh, you're right. What about that? Oh, have I thought about that? Yes, you have. It's not going to help. Don't believe your mind. So Ajahn Chah, Thai monk, famously said, when your mind tells you something, you should say, liar, liar. So liar, liar, pants on fire. So yes, right? You don't need your mind to tell you. Like, thank you very much. I don't need a secretary, right? I know that. So, if you're worried about dying, well, you know that you're going to die. Just meditate on it and accept it. It's part of reality. It's not to be afraid of. And any other anxiety about work or people or interactions or social anxiety. So all those things, they can be resolved through, it is the way it is. You cultivate mindfulness and you start to just accept like, oh, this worry, it doesn't help. It's just an unhealthy habit. It's actually not helping. It's only making it worse. So we want to have a peaceful mind, and you can have that. Every one of you is able of having that. So the Buddha talks about it in those more general terms, and anxiety definitely falls under those. And Maivel, I hope you're doing well, Maivel, says that she has been advised to practice grieving as a way of connecting with what is, opening the heart, dropping delusion, and generating skillfulness. Yet grieving doesn't align with equanimity. When I do it, I feel the massive stress in my body and the impact of highly painful storylines, perceptions, and mental habits of greed and aversion come to the forefront. It's hard to bear, but it also connects me with the First Noble Truth. What do you think about grieving in light of the Brahma Viharas? Okay, so very good question and very, I think, on point. So this is very relevant to your practice. And so so grieving in order to accept our suffering and understand what we're going through. So it's important not to practice repression, right? Though I remember it really stuck in me. I remember when I was in high school, I had like a week where I had a lot of anxiety. And this was before I was, and I ended up listening to some Dhamma talks, and it really, helped me get out of it. It helped me stop being anxious. And I remember in one of those, the person said that people say like repression is bad, but it comes back, but that's just because they weren't successful at repressing it. So that's actually a good point, right? It only comes back if you're not actually repressing. So repression is not good. We don't want to repress. But it is true that actually sometimes there's a wrong idea of like we have to let it out. And that's also wrong. I remember in Italy, a man told me that he was a Buddhist, and he told me his sister had a view that um, anger is stored in your heart. And if you don't get it out, then it will just get worse. So like she would regularly get angry and yell and let out, quote unquote, let out her anger, which was stored up in her heart or whatever. So that's not how anger works. It's not like a physical substance that you're storing in your body or in your mind. Anger, as everything, including grief, including trauma, and any emotion, anything, is dependently arisen. So that means under certain conditions, it appears. Under other conditions, it doesn't appear. It's not stored anywhere. It doesn't come from anywhere. There's a verse, a Buddhist verse, which says that dhammas, so things, phenomena, there's no stockpile of them, and there's no store that they come from or that they go to. They appear like mustard seeds on a needle point, just for a moment, and they're gone. They don't come from anywhere, and they don't go anywhere. So under certain conditions, we experience anger. But the anger is not stored. You don't need to let it out. You need to understand what is the cause and effect principles. What are the principles of causality? What are the principles of conditionality? Why is anger manifesting? What is the root, right? So an example, if you see a mango seed and you see a mango tree, or you see even better, an apple seed, so small, and you see an apple tree, you think, wow, I need to learn those folding skills. How can you fold all that in there? How can you store that apple tree and that seed? Do they use a vacuum, an airtight vacuum or something? There's no apple tree inside the seed. You will never find one. If you cut up the apple seed, is there a little tree in there? Those little things you put in water and they expand? It's not like that. There's no tree inside there. There's no apples either. Like, okay, there's 10 apples in this one. No, it doesn't work that way, right? When the conditions are right, apples appear. So our mind is like that. There's not anger in there. It's not like, oh, there's a lot of anger in here. No, when the conditions are ripe, then you will get angry. If you take the seed and as you say, you crush the seed and you burn it, you say, oh, you're crushing all the apples. There's no apples being killed. There's no apples being crushed. There's no apples there. So it's the same. Like if you remove your anger properly, not repressing, but properly removing the conditions, like you remove the seeds, you're not actually destroying the anger. The anger was never there in the first place. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that look like in terms of grieving and trauma and stress and these types of emotions which build up? Well, what it means is that we have to acknowledge when we have a pattern. So if the mind consistently returns to a theme, like a common one is grief and trauma, what's now often what's called trauma. The mind will sometimes stick on things, right? So like something happens and it just keeps coming back up, and you try to distract yourself or do something else or turn it away, and it keeps coming back. It doesn't go away. So that's a sign that you have something there which needs to be investigated deeper. So it's kind of like you have a garden, right? And you have weeds, and so you keep snipping the top of the weeds, and the weeds keep coming back. And you're like, what's going on? They keep coming back. It's because there's roots under the ground, right? But it's not like again, there's not a store of a bunch of weeds hiding in the ground. There's roots there. They grow from the roots. So if you remove the roots, the weeds will not come back. So it's the same with these emotions. So sometimes just cutting the surface of the emotion is not working. So then you have to investigate. You have to use your discernment. You have to use your wisdom. You have to use your mindfulness and your gentleness and your clarity and your calm, all those good qualities. You have to use those to investigate why is this coming back? What is the condition? Where's the root? And so probably there's some kind of idea of like, it should be like this, it could be like that, I deserve this, that is how I am, that's how they are, So sometimes you have to work through those misconceptions, those unrealistic ideas, which don't correspond to reality. And as you work through those with gentleness, you can start to uproot the reason that those emotions manifest. So in the beginning, it is important to recognize what's coming up. Yes, So if, for example, you never processed your grief, if someone died or something happened and you immediately blanked it out and, repressed it and never looked at it, you might need to take some time and just understand, what are you working with here? It's kind of like you had a dirty house and or a dirty room in your house, and you decided just to put a blanket over it all. And you're like, I just don't want to look at that. I just don't want to think about it. And then you come back and you're like, oh, it's still really bad. And then you go away and it just builds up. It just gets dustier and dustier and dirtier. And so that's how it can be sometimes, right? We like have little corners of our mind where we tuck things away and we're like, I'm just going to keep this away. And, I hope it never comes back. But then you go rummaging around in the attic one day and you're like, oh man, I have all these memories and all these emotions and, and then you're like, I don't want to deal with that though. So then you run back downstairs, like there's a ghost in the attic. So our mind is like that, we hide these emotions and things. So sometimes you have to say, take off the blanket. What's in there? Is it moldy? Is it dirty? Is it dusty? And you just have to see, wow, that's filthy. It needs to be cleaned and it's not pleasant. It's not nice. So yeah, sometimes you look at your mind and you're like, yeah, I am suffering, and this is not nice. This is uncomfortable. I don't want to experience this. I want to throw a blanket over it and go, hide. And so you say, well, but it'll only get worse. So then you start, what do? Get your gloves, you put on some chanting, and you start cleaning up. You start dusting and washing and moving, and you start getting it out of there, right? So yeah, so in the beginning, you might have to look at the grief. But I personally, we haven't talked about this specifically one-on-one really, too much, but I would question like an instruction that you should actively, consistently, recurringly activate unwholesome mental patterns. I would question that a little bit. If it's naturally coming up, that's one thing. If you're actively generating it, that's another thing, right? So like if you're naturally experiencing emotions of grief and you're repressing them, and you're being advised like you should allow those when they come up, just wait and experience them fully. That's one thing. But if they're telling you like you need to actively generate feelings of being sorry and for yourself and grieving and lamenting and remorse and this types of habits, I would question if that's really useful, right? Rather than doing that, you can still look at what's there, but you just work with it in a better way. You don't have to actively make it worse. So like if you have a wound, and so imagine that someone has an issue and they don't want to go to the doctor for it. So people try to convince them like you really should get that treated, but they're like, oh, I don't want to think about it. So they don't get it treated and it gets worse over time. So then they go to the doctor and the doctor is like, yeah, this is really bad. You should have came earlier. And so what is the doctor going to do, right? Well, the doctor might apply some treatment and it might be painful. It might be more painful than it would have been. You might need to get surgery, whatever. So it might be painful. But the doctor's not going to say, yeah, you should go and you should start poking your wound to remind you how painful it is. Start stabbing in there, start, pouring painful water and liquids on it to remind you how painful it is and make it worse, make it really stick in your mind how horrible this is to have this wound. No, that's not needed. You don't need to do that. You just treat it, right? So yes, you made a mistake, letting it grow, but you don't then need to like remind yourself how painful it is. That's not necessary. You just acknowledge like, okay, I have repressed this. I have not taken care of this. So I will now treat it, but you don't add to it. It's the same with the mind. If you have been burying unwholesome emotions, you don't need to then make them worse and start poking, like agitating it. You just, acknowledge it, and then now you need to treat it. And yes, it might be difficult. It might be worse than if you had treated it at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that you have to, actively intensify. So in terms of grieving in light of the Brahma Viharas, then I'm not too sure what to say without going on too long. But I would say you can experiment in your own practice. Yes, all four are good. So loving kindness towards yourself. May I be happy? May I be safe? That's really good. That's really, really good practice, because a lot of people, they struggle to feel a sense of self-worth if they've gone through something. Maybe their parents neglected them, or their guardians neglected them, or something like that. It's very normal to then feel a sense of lack, like difficulty experiencing what does it feel like to be cared for, to be loved. So loving kindness meditation is when you actively cultivate the feeling of loving care and gentleness, right? You're cultivating that in your own mind. You don't need someone else. You can do it yourself. You don't need love is an emotion that is dependently arisen. So if you put in the conditions, you can get it. And so that can be good. Compassion, also good. May I be free of suffering, and also may others be free of suffering. Remembering that when others harm us, it's because of their own suffering, because their own mind is so disturbed that they have to act out of it. So also having compassion for ourselves and others. Rejoicing and being grateful. Rejoicing in the fact that you found the Dhamma. Rejoicing in all the practices you have, the opportunities you have. Not being caught up in a narrative of like, my life is horrible. But no, there's a lot to rejoice in. And there's also a lot to rejoice in others as well. Like even if our parents mistreated us, they probably helped us. We probably would have died without them, right? Even if our caretakers weren't the best, we probably would have died without them. Even if our friends mistreated us, we probably would have not been so well without any friends, right? So actually, sometimes we focus too much on the bad part of people. And Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddhist disciples, he gave a teaching on how to remove resentment. And one of those is, the teaching is that you reflect on the good qualities of people. You reflect on the goodness in them, and you acknowledge the bad, but you don't dwell on it, right? And he says that for some people, like they might have done, they have a little bit of bad, but like a lot of really good. But some people, they have really, they're mostly bad, mostly bad stuff. And so, but he says, imagine that you're in the desert and you're so thirsty and it's so dry. And as you're walking, there's a in the mud, there's a cow's footprint or a cow stepped. And in that footprint, there's a little bit of water in there. And so you get down all on your chest and you bend all the way to the mud and you sip the muddy water just to quench your thirst. He says sometimes you have to be like that. So some people, you can find a little good, there's a little good in there, and you go out of your way, and it's still, it still feels good to drink water. Even if it's from a little bit, it's still nourishing. It still helps quench your thirst. So even some people, you might have to really get down there and, really, go down and dig deep, but there is water down there. So, sometimes it just requires that practice of, just really not dwelling on the negative, because that, again, you don't need a secretary. All the horrible things that people have done to you. It's clear in your mind, but we don't focus on the good things as much. So with ourselves and others. So the Brahma Viharas are good. Oh, and finally, I'll say the last one, equanimity. One of the ways of cultivating equanimity is reflecting on karma. Reflecting, basically, you reap what you sow, and that they're the heir of their deeds. So what that means is like, sometimes we think, oh, it's not fair, it's not just. But the Buddha is saying, when someone does an unwholesome deed, they've actually caused suffering to themselves. So you don't be happy about it, but you just think like, you know what? This was their decision. They chose to do that. At the end of the day, it was their choice. And if someone chooses to do something, you can't change that. It's been done. What's done has been done. And, they will receive the consequences of that. So may they, I hope that they're happy. I hope that they're well. And so you just recognize like, what? This is just how it goes. This is the wheel of life. People make choices and they hurt others. And sometimes they don't experience the results of that immediately, but you just reflect like, this is, so it can give you some distance, some balance. Like it's actually, you're not to be angry at them because they're actually going to suffer because of it. So, yeah. Okay, so that was a while, but I hope that that's useful for people in general. And then HPD says that they were diagnosed with ADHD. It's very hard for me to sit still for meditation, and they are impulsive. Say sometimes they broke the precept of right speech, especially driving in traffic, after I started studying Buddhism. I started to change, but you are concerned about the past when you broke the precepts due to impulse control. How can you improve yourself going forward? Well, HPD, I would say you don't need to worry about, just focus on doing your practice to the best of your ability, and that's okay. You don't need to, lament about any being diagnosed with ADHD. And so in terms of your past actions, well, one thing is to remember, that what's important is that you have resolved right now to not do that. So if you just dwell on the feeling bad about yourself, that can be helpful to an extent to make you not want to do it again, to make you, feel like, okay, that was a mistake. So it's important to recognize our mistakes. But once you've recognized it and you've determined in your mind you really don't want to do that again, you're gonna be good. Then you can let it go. You can forgive yourself. You're forgiven. So when people made a mistake and they went to the Buddha, they said, it was really foolish of me. I'm really sorry. I really shouldn't have done that. And the Buddha says, yeah, that was really foolish of you. That was really silly. But it is growth in the training of the noble ones to recognize a mistake for what it is, to make amends, and to commit to restraint in the future. You are forgiven. And that's it. It's done. So like, let's say a monk breaks a precept. So let's say like a monk breaks into the pantry at night and they have a sandwich or something, right? So eating in the evening, right? Actually, should I do this? Yeah, okay. So there's a story about a person, not a monk, but a person who was in training to be a monk. And they, this is an Ajahn Brahm story because Ajahn Brahm has many stories, but I remember this one. And so they were in white, so they were wearing white on 8 precepts. So they were not eating in the afternoon. And they went to the monk and they said, oh, I feel so horrible. They were, really dreading telling him about this and confessing that they ate in the evening. And they're like, I feel really bad. I ate it. I'm so sorry. I ate in the evening. And because as monks, we have a precept not to eat in the evening. So, and Ajahn Brahm said, okay, don't do it again or something like that, and he was like, is that it? There's no punishment? And like wanted to be punished for it, right? So sometimes we're like that. Like we want to be punished. Like we're like, really? That's all? I'm forgiven? I don't. And so then Ajahn Brahm told him, okay, so for those who don't know, you have a whip, right? And it's a punishment called a cat, right? So it's like it's a whip with many parts, and it's a lash thing. So Ajahn Brahm said, okay, 9 strokes of the cat. And then he was like, oh, and he said he apparently went white, and he was like super afraid and terrified that they were going to, beat him. And Ajahn Brahm, had the monastery cat come over and wanted him to pet it 9 times. Right? So he got 9 times to say, I'm sorry. So sometimes, we in order to get over something, we want to be punished and we want to do something. But the lesson here is, you don't need to. You really don't. You just, if you've properly recognized what you've done and you regret it and you recognize it as a mistake and you commit to restraint in the future, that's it. You're forgiven. Now, of course, you have to really mean it. You can't be like, I'm sorry, and then you do it again. You have to mean it. Or if you do it again, you have to really, it should be a mistake, not like a intentional. So, you're forgiven if you commit to restraint in the future and you recognize it for what it is. So you've done that. And the Buddha says this. He says, how do you get over, your past precept mistakes? It's when you basically recognize it for a mistake and then you commit to taking the precepts again and you say, from now on, I'm taking these. And that you're good now. You're purified. And you can also even do a ceremony like for yourself, like renouncing all the bad actions that you've done and saying like recognizing all the unskillful actions and saying all the unskillful things I've done, whether knowingly or unknowingly, through body, speech, and mind, through ignorance, hatred, and greed, to those I know and everyone I've harmed, to myself and other blah blah blah, and say I'm really sorry. That was really silly of me. I really repent about that, and I'm going to commit to restraint in the future. And I renounce all those bad actions. I renounce it all. So you get over it. So like I shouldn't even say this, but when I was a layperson, I had some music that was made, and some of the things in there, I regret them, right? And so then at some point I said, I renounce all the music I've made. I renounce all of it. So if anyone, if anyone ever finds it, I renounce it so that they don't, may they not be, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to be delighting or associating in it. Right. So, yeah, you can renounce the things that you've done. And so that in your mind, what's the point of that? The point is that you're making a determination, like I'm done with that past behavior, right? It's over. And you're a new person now. Okay. And Harry says that they're interested in finding an in-person Buddhist community to attend along with your online interaction with Empty Cloud, but none are early Buddhists. How should I proceed to investigate other Buddhist groups to see which are most compatible? Most Theravada groups I found are more cultural centers than practice centers in the places I've lived. Okay, so good question. Well, one thing you say is you can't find any early Buddhist communities, and I'm not surprised, given that those are only in ancient India 2,500 years ago. It's going to be pretty hard to find one of those. maybe you'll find like an old monastery or something. So early Buddhist communities don't exist anymore. This is the latest Buddhism there is, live, coming to you from West Orange, New Jersey. So this is late Buddhism, very, very late, right? The latest Buddhism. So you won't find early Buddhism. It's not possible. It's gone. It's like, I want to practice ancient Greek philosophy. I mean, you can read about it, but you can't be there with Socrates in the center, getting questioned about your thoughts on virtue. It's not, he's dead. It's over. So early Buddhism is over. Unfortunately, for those of us who wish it was still around, it doesn't exist anymore. So now you can study it, you can practice it, you can live it, you can be, inspired by it and so on. But you'll never find an early Buddhist community because they don't exist, right? For one, they don't even speak English. So I bet if you did find one, you would have a hard time interacting, right? So it's important to remember that, like, we have to be realistic. We're not going to find Socrates. If you go to Greece and you're like, I want to find Plato, I want to find someone just like that, you're going to find just a bunch of people like you, just a bunch of dudes and guys and friends and gals and people and old people, young people doing people stuff. You're not going to find the romantic ideas that you have of those things, right? So it's the same. Like, if you go to a place, you're not going to find the Buddha, in Jeta's Grove. You're going to find a modern community, and they might have their own interpretations and practices. And so you just do your best to practice to the best of your ability within those communities and learn from them. There is so much about Buddhism that is learned being embodied, being there, like, one thing is, studying suttas and meditating and so on. But when you go to a Buddhist community, even you say the cultural centers, and you see the people giving food to the monks and giving dana and supporting the Sangha, there's a lot there that you can't really read about it. Like, you have to learn, you'll see it. You'll see how it works, and you'll see how they do it, and you'll see their mind states and how it makes them so happy, and you'll see all the goodness there. And so that you can do that. And that is, right back to the time of the Buddha. That is an early Buddhist practice. Supporting the Sangha is the oldest, lay practice. The very first lay person, the Buddhist lay person, what did they do? They offered, they supported the Buddha. At least, maybe today we had a resident offer a special dana in honor of Sujata, right? The story of the woman who offered the Buddha his meal before he became enlightened after he had done extreme fasting. And so it goes back even before the Buddha was enlightened. People have been offering food to the monks. So offering food to the monks and dana and so on, that's a really good practice, foundation. Most Buddhist people, that is Buddhism. Like, if you say, what is Buddhism? It's going to the temple and offering things to the Sangha and making merit, maybe practicing some precepts every now and then. So for a lot of people, that is Buddhism, that is their practice. And that is true even in ancient India, even early Buddhism. That's how it is. Most people, that's what they do. So you can learn a lot about that, learn a lot from the embodied experience of it. And then you can also learn other things, other things which you'll just learn in time. So I would recommend any center you can find, go and learn and spend time there. And be open-minded, and you'll grow, Okay, and Mariah says, what is a skillful way to practice with a mind that is readily inclined to being judgmental and critical of other people? Even if I don't verbally express these thoughts, they still agitate my mind. Well, reflecting on the drawbacks of our judgmental mind states can be helpful, right? Like, it's uncomfortable. Like, it's uncomfortable to be fault-finding. Like, bad haircut, could be better. So then, you're always in a state of agitation. It's not pleasant, right? So that's not literal. But if you reflect, like, it's actually, like, I'm living in a spiky, hot, uncomfortable mind. I don't want that. When your house is uncomfortable, what do? You adjust, right? Maybe you get a fan in there if it's too hot. Warm up, get a blanket if it's too cold. You make it cozy. You make adjustments. You clean if it's dirty. But when our mind is dirty and, angry, agitated, and restless and irritated, we also should clean it up. We want to be good. We want to be happy, right? So it's not happy. So we have delusion, and that's what our mind thinks. It thinks, oh, if I complain about these things, that's where I should be doing this. Or I'm right, everyone else is wrong. They are. So like a grumpy old man. So we just remember, we should reflect, like, this is delusional. This is not actually happiness. This is suffering. This is uncomfortable. It's not good for me. It's not good for others. It's not good for anyone. So then you just reflect like, oh, no. So then, Grandpa Mariah, the Grandpa Mariah in your head who starts complaining about everything, you say, time for your medicine, Grandpa, time to take a nap. Calm down, right? So you just calm that mind down. Just don't listen to it. Disregard that. And you instead cultivate loving kindness. You cultivate gentleness. And you think, like the simile I mentioned of Venerable Sariputta, how can you find the goodness in things? So maybe it's really cold. You reflect, oh, I'm so grateful that it's so cold in here because this is teaching me how comfortable it is when it's warm. If it wasn't for the cold, you wouldn't appreciate the warm. I remember when I was very young, I was walking to school and it was so cold out, and I was like, this is really uncomfortable. And then I reflected, oh, it's because this cold is so uncomfortable. That's why when I get in the building, I'm so comfortable. And then I was fine, actually. I was equanimous towards the cold because it was just reflecting like, oh, it's relative like that. It's the cold is actually what makes it, the reason I'm able to be comfortable is because I'm uncomfortable right now. So there would be no such thing as comfort if you weren't uncomfortable from time to time. There would be no such thing as perfection if there weren't things to fix and so on. So those concepts are relative. And so you can just remember, like, maybe I don't like these things, but actually, if I liked everything, that would be horrible. If everyone agreed with everything, everyone agreed with me. Everyone made the exact things I like. Everyone dressed exactly how they should. Everyone acted exactly how they ought to. It would be an incredibly boring world. Quickly, you would get tired of that, right? So you just reflect like, oh, it's good to be challenged. It's good to be around people who are different. It's good to experience things that I'm less comfortable with. And it's uncomfortable to be judgmental and irritated. So yeah, those are some reflections you can do. As well as just developing a quieter mind in general, appreciating the silence of the mind. Okay, and Hilar says, do young or new aspiring monks typically perform chores for elder monastics as part of their integration, akin to a Cinderella dynamic? How can one set boundaries within their new monastic family while still seeking to join? So you say you were in a monastery and you saw a young woman who was an aspirant, not yet a nun, just dressed in white, being demanded by the older monks a lot. It discouraged me to want to be a monk. I would want to practice the teachings, not to be an unpaid worker. Well, Hilar, it's hard to comment on what other people are doing, but I would say the attitude of like, I don't want to be an unpaid worker is definitely the wrong one to have. That's not what we're talking about. We were talking about service. So yes, it is training. It's training for young monks and also old monks. Any monk who's senior to you, then you take care of them. There was once that even junior monks, if they're sick. So there was once that the Buddha was traveling and a monk was sick in a monastery and no one was taking care of him. He was like really sick. He was like vomiting, diarrhea, couldn't get out of bed. Not like he had a cold or whatever. So he was really sick, and no one was taking care of him because they're, all doing their own practice. And so what did the Buddha do? The Buddha went in there and he wiped his butt and he cleaned his body and he took care of him. The Buddha took care of his body. He took care of the monk. And you can imagine that, you're it's the Buddha there. He's, helping you. And he's, putting they didn't have toilets, remember, also. So he's, cleaning your diarrhea and your vomit, and he's nursing your body and cooling you and massaging your limbs and so on. And then the Buddha comes out and he's like, new rule, whenever a monk is sick, you need to take care of them because this is your new family. You don't have your parents, mama is not there to give you medicine. You are now your family. You monks are your family now. So you need to take care of each other. So that's in monasteries, if a monk is sick. So I remember one time when I was in Italy, my preceptor, Bhante Sudasa, he was at an ashram, an Indian, Indian style, I should say. Most of them are actually Italian, but he was at an ashram and he got some kind of food poisoning. So all night, vomiting, shaking, shivering, and we nursed him, right? We helped him. So we didn't say, mindfulness of the body, Bhante, see you tomorrow, right? No, right? You help the person. So you nurse them and we did chanting for him even and so on. And so, yeah, that's part of monastic training. And even if they're not sick also. So for example, it's very common, we wash seniors' bowls. We help wash their laundry. We help pack their bags, maybe, help clean their room potentially. Help them carry things, help them setting up things, help them maybe even massaging them if they're not feeling well, giving them medicine, bringing them extra foods and so on. So all those things, all the things that you would do when you're caring for someone. And yeah, that's a big part of the training, because you are learning how to be not selfish. You are learning how to care for other people. You are learning how to be thoughtful. You are learning how to be watchful. You are learning how to let go of your preferences. Like, I don't want to do the laundry right now. I want to go meditate. And, too bad. Like, there is no, I don't want to do, this. I don't want to help them. I just want to do my own thing. And yeah, that's a defilement, actually. That's selfishness. So that's spiritual bypassing, right? That's like, I want to meditate. I don't want to help people. Well, that's actually selfishness. That's not practice. That's laziness. So attending people is part of the practice. It's part of caring. It's part of developing loving kindness. And it's also a way to get close to people. Like, you get close to monks, when you, like, actually one time at the monastery, we had a lay woman, a Sri Lankan woman. She arranged for some of the lay people to massage the monks' feet, which in Asia, you do it for your parents and you do it for monks. It's very common. So I remember there was this guy, like, not a Buddhist person, and he was assigned to massage my feet. And I was really reluctant, because I felt but I was told, like, you really need to do this out of compassion for them. You need to. I really tried to avoid it, and I was like, but I was told, you need to do this. So also, it's the other way around. Like, we also have to allow ourselves to be helped. And I was talking about this recently. It's much easier actually to do things yourself. When other people are helping you, it's actually not easier most of the time. Sometimes if you're sick, yes, but a lot of times you have to explain, and different people do it and blah blah blah. So actually, it's easier to do it yourself. But you are helped out of compassion for the people, so that they can do good things. They want to do, they want to be generous. They want to be kind. They want to be thoughtful. So you set aside, like, I want to do it easier, more convenient, and you let them help. So and then this guy, so he was, I think he's American, or he is American. I don't know his exact background, but he's not Buddhist. And he was massaging my feet, and I think it was a great experience for him. And actually, now he's going to become a monk. He wants to become a monk. And he will be probably doing some of those duties. It might be getting the bowl, cleaning the kuti. There's also a story of some of the famous Thai monks, like Ajahn Mun, or so on, where you would typically clean the monk's hut, right? So they have a little hut and like a single room, and you clean it, you arrange it. And so they have a story, like a monk who he was the attendant, so he went into the hut and he arranged the things. And Ajahn Mun, the senior monk, came in and he moved everything around. It wasn't right. So then the monk had to go and learn it again, and it wasn't right. And he would never tell him how to do it. He had to just figure it out. So that's learning, like, how to watch what people need. And you learn that also. So like, sometimes you set something up. You set something up for a monk, and you realize, oh, I forgot this thing. So then you learn that, like, oh, I should set that up. So then I'm being more thoughtful, being more mindful. So it's part of the training. It's not an unpaid worker. Like, that's the wrong attitude to have it. You are getting paid so much. You're making a lot of merit. You're developing your spiritual practice. You're cultivating a heart, your heart to be more thoughtful and gentle and caring. So you're doing a lot of good stuff, right? It's not like it's not an exchange, right? So now, in terms of being bossed around, I would say you might be careful of accusing, because you don't necessarily know. It's normal if someone, part of their job, they might just be offering to help, and you just say, oh, we need this, and then they go and get it. It's not like an ill will thing. If someone is bossing around, then that's just part of your practice. They shouldn't, obviously, we don't want to have a bossy, demanding mind, but if there is bossing around, then you deal with it, right? You practice with it. So like another monk that we were talking about recently, another monk, his preceptor, he had him, go to a room in the monastery, and he had him get all his stuff and move all his things into the room. And then later on, the preceptor came and said, actually, I think it's better you go in the other room. So then he had to move everything over there. And then the preceptor came back and said, actually, we have some guests coming. I think you should go back to the room. So then he moved. And as he was packing, the preceptor said, actually, I think you should go back to the other room. And the fifth time, he's like, I've been moving, and that's enough. I don't need to move anymore. And he was like, and also other things, like the preceptor was like, there was like a few tiles in the kitchen that were broken, like 3 tiles. And the priest was like, you need to fix these. You need to get new ones. So he sent them all over the place looking for these tiles. And the people were like, this is ridiculous. We don't make 3 tiles. They make a bunch of them. He's like, I really need them. And he came back and he came back with some tiles. And the priest put them. He's like, the color's slightly off. You need to go get different ones. So then he went, and he couldn't find any of them. And he had to ask a ton of people, days, I think, looking for these tiles. And eventually the priest was like, actually, I found them. We had some ones in the back. So why? Was he being a jerk? No, he was training the monk to let go. Stop being my way, how I want it. I don't agree with this. You do it, and that's how it goes. So then when you're meditating and your mind's like, I want to get up, you have the strength not to. When you want to get angry, you have the strength not to. When you want to indulge, you have the strength not to, because you've disciplined your mind. You've disciplined it to set aside its preferences, its selfishness, its impulses, and you just do what needs to be done. So the Buddha says, meditate, and you say, I don't want to meditate, and you do it anyway, right? So you are learning to be have a tame mind. And then again, like, you can recollect all that goodness. So then after your whole day of helping people, then you feel like you just spent a whole day doing good things. There's nothing to be remorseful about. There's nothing to regret. Whereas you're lazy and indulgent, and then you have a bunch of stuff to regret. So there's nothing you're losing. So those are a few thoughts on that. So I wouldn't be discouraged about monastic life, but you might have to learn. That is part. Many people that's new to them. Okay. And Don El Libro Grande says that they haven't been able to let go of their ex-partner. Tried contemplating the asubas, sending metta, quitting to talk to them, remembering the hard moments. I still think of them every day. Help. Well, I mean, sometimes it just takes time, right? You just have to. I don't know the story of why you're not with the person or whatever, but if they broke up with you and you didn't want them to break up with you, then you just have to get over it. There's really no advice. You just have to get over it. And you might just take some time. You might just have to reflect, like, I can't control other people. Maybe you can even imagine, what would it be like if I could? Like, what would it be like if you could actually get back with them, even though they don't want to? How would that be? How would that relationship go? Like, they had to become your partner again, but they don't actually want to be. And you just imagine, like, how would that be? That would not be nice, would it? That would be bad. So they don't want to be with you, probably, assuming that's what happened. So what do? You have to accept they don't want to be with you, right? So you say it's their choice, and it's their, this is also an opportunity for you to learn. Happiness does not come from other people. It doesn't come from relationships. The Buddha says, he gives a math equation. He says, 1 dear one equals 1 suffering. So you do the math, right? How much is 2 dear ones? How much is 3? 4 dear ones, 4 suffering, right? So one time there was a woman, a Buddhist disciple, she came and she was grieving because her grandchild died. And she was, I'm so upset that my grandchild died. And the Buddha said, well, what would you think? What if you had 100 grandchildren? And she said, that would be so wonderful, 100 grandchildren. And he says, well, what if that means 100 of them would die? And she said, oh yeah, you're right. I don't want 100 grandchildren, right? And at one point the Buddha said to the queen, he taught her that, what the people that you hold dear, that you love and cherish, and you're attached to, they actually cause you suffering. And she said this, and the king was like, you just repeat whatever that ascetic says, don't you? You just listen to whatever he says. And some people came by and they heard the Buddha saying this. And he said, I don't think that's true. Your dear ones, 1 dear one equals 1 happiness. And so then they went, and there was a table of gamblers playing. And he said, what do you guys think? And they said, yeah, I think our dear ones make us happy. So he agreed with the gamblers. But actually, our dear one, 1 dear one equals 1 suffering. And the Buddha, he gave an example to a villager. He said, imagine that someone you love very, very dearly, you find out that they've been sentenced to death. Find out that they're going to be punished. They've been wrongly accused of murder, and they're going to be killed. How would you feel? He says, I would not feel good. He says, why? He says, because I am attached to them, because I love them very dearly, because I have a lot of attachment. And so, yeah, that's why, because of attachment. So with attachment, with dear ones, with cherishing and loving, and not in the sense of metta, but in the sense of like self, wanting to have for yourself, that causes suffering because you can't control people. They will fade. And one of the reflections that the Buddha says should be done again and again, sabbehi me piyehi manapehi nana bhavo vinabhavo. I will change and be parted from everything that I love and cherish. That is a reality, right? So you will lose everything you love. Either while you're alive, it'll change, or when you die, you'll have to say goodbye. So even you imagine with your partner, you had a happy marriage, happily ever after, you sailed off into the sunset. Well, what happens when you get too close to the sun? You die, right? So eventually you have to die. So happiest marriage, happiest partner in the whole world, eventually you have to say goodbye to them, and you have to enter into the unknown depths of death. And you can't take any baggage. You can't bring anything with you except for the deeds that you've done and the mind that you've cultivated. So yeah, you just reflect, like, this is inevitable, and this is what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught this. You just reflect. Yes, it's true. Another poem from one of the Buddha's bhikkhuni, female monk disciples. She became enlightened, and she used to be very beautiful. She used to be so beautiful. All, her whole body very beautiful. And she's old now, and she has a whole poem, and she's reflecting on. Actually, I wonder if I can just pull this up, just for the sake of it, because this is a good one. Let's read this together. Okay. So she says, "My hair was as black as bees, graced with curly tips. Now old, it has become like hemp bark. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. Crowned with flowers, my head was as fragrant as a perfume box. Now old, it smells like dog fur. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My hair was as thick as a well-planted forest. It shone, parted with brush and pins. Now old, it's patchy and sparse. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. With plates of black and ribbons of gold, it was so pretty, adorned with braids. Now old, my head's gone bald. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My eyebrows used to look so nice, like crescents painted by an artist. Now old, they droop with wrinkles. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My eyes shone brilliant as gems, wide and indigo. Ruined by age, they shine no more. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My nose was like a perfect peak, lovely in my bloom of youth. Now old, it's shriveled like a pepper. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My earlobes were so pretty, like lovingly crafted bracelets. Now old, they droop with wrinkles. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My teeth used to be so pretty, bright as a jasmine flower. Now old, they're broken and yellow. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My singing was sweet as a cuckoo, wandering in the forest groves. Now old, it's patchy and croaking. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My neck used to be so pretty, like a polished shell of conch. Now old, it's bowed and bent. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My arms used to be so pretty, like rounded crossbars. With age, they wrinkle and sag as a patala tree. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My hands used to be so pretty, adorned with lovely golden rings. Now old, they're like red radishes. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My breasts used to be so pretty, swelling round, close and high. Now they droop like water bags. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My body used to be so pretty, like a polished slab of lustrous gold. Now it's covered with fine wrinkles. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. Both my thighs used to be so pretty, like an elephant's trunk. Now old, they're like bamboo. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. My calves used to be so pretty, adorned with cute golden anklets. Now old, they're like sesame sticks. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. And it goes on. Both my feet used to be so pretty, plump as if with cotton wool. Now old, they're cracked and wrinkly. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. This bag of bones once was such, but now it's withered, home to so much pain, like a house in decay with plaster crumbling. The word of the truthful one is confirmed. So that is Ambapali's poem. And so you can think, this is the nature. Who's the truthful one? It's the Buddha, right? She's saying, he was right. He was right. The body is suffering. It's not permanent. I'm going to lose everything that I hold dear and cherish. And she's like, she's going through a whole guided meditation here, like a body scan, right? It used to be so great. And now it's, so your partner, even if it lasted, it wouldn't have been, the truthful one, the truthful speaker, the Buddha, he's right. He's always right, whether we believe it or not. So just don't, this is the nature of your relationship. It's suffering. So, okay. Now we're almost out of time. So let's see if we can get the last questions. Lots of questions from Michael. I don't think we'll have time. Sorry. Do monks have insurance? Not necessarily. Could they go to the dentist, etc.? So all these different specialists and blah blah blah. They could go, yeah, if they get donated. You know, if they can get state insurance. You can get free insurance if you have a state where it's necessary, and so on. And is it recommended to take cold showers to practice detachment? Would you want to renounce it as a monk? You could. You know, in some countries they take cold showers as monks. It's not a big deal. I mean, as a monk, what skills do I need? Cooking, sewing, navigating, plumbing, speaking different languages. So cooking, not really. Maybe if you're training in a monastery, you might need to cook. But sewing, navigating, plumbing, again, not really necessarily. But maybe if it's in a monastery where there's plumbing needs. Speaking different languages, not necessarily, though it's also helpful to speak Pali, to know some Pali and so on. So there's a lot of skills you need as a monk, but that would all kind of happen over time. Can monks bathe in the ocean or rivers for fun? No, we cannot. We have a precept against that. When could monks live alone after 5 years of training? Is that recommendable? Monks can live alone whenever they want, but it's recommended that for 5 years in the vinaya, you're supposed to have a teacher, live with a teacher or preceptor. Okay, Lily says, are emotional connections between family and friends an obstacle to spiritual practice? Well, we've just talked about that. So I think you can obviously have emotional connections, but it will be, they will cause you suffering. So I think that we've covered that actually pretty clearly. And then Lily says, Venerable, I've heard that experience is made of separate moments, arising and passing away. But in practice, like when I feel physical pain, it seems continuous, not separate. Why do we describe experience this way? Is it something we can actually see or just a method of analysis? I don't know if we have time for this. I would say it looks continuous, but you can break experience up as fast as your mind is moving. That's the thing. When our mind is moving very fast, it tends to focus on building continuity, and also the sense of time will pass quicker because your mind is moving. So time is relative. That is a acknowledged fact, right? Whether you're a Buddhist or not, time is relative. It doesn't exist objectively. That is, Einstein and onward and so on. So time is not an objective thing. If you put a clock in one room and you put it in another room across the universe, they won't be the same because of the many factors. So it's the same with your mind. When your mind moves quick, time moves quick. When your mind moves slow, time moves slow. And so your experience will seem, very continuous and changing because of your mind moving quickly. If your mind slows down, you might notice how the mind moves and how experience falls away and it's shifting and changing. The time will move slower, but you might notice how things are passing away. So anyway, it's kind of relative to the state of your mind. That's why it doesn't normally look that way. And then Mita says, following up on the trauma question, what if this trauma is because of our wrong decision taken some time back and no amount of repenting removes that guilt? I think we covered this. You remove the guilt by making a resolve not to do it in the future and renouncing it and apologizing for it. And you let it go. And eventually you just learn through the practice through your Buddhist practice, as your wisdom deepens and as your meditation deepens, you'll learn how to remove your guilt. So famously, you have the story of Angulimala, right? The serial killer, who Angulimala means necklace of fingers. So he had a necklace of all the fingers of his victims, and he became a monk, he became an arahant, and he got over that. So unless you killed a bunch of people and you collected all their fingers on a necklace, I think you can get over it. Even if you did, you could get over it. Okay, I think at this point, we will have to close. So I apologize if we didn't get to your questions. You're welcome to leave them in any future monk chats. I hope that you have a good night or a good day, whenever time you're watching this. And I hope that your practice goes well, that you're happy, peaceful, safe. And we will see you in any future live streams or programs here at the monastery in person. So have a good night and keep practicing.